war was an emergency was on our mind every single hour of the day.
Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for rights.
When they said I'm black and I'm proud, that meant something.
It was the age of selfishness. It was the age of self-indulgence. It was the age of anti-authority.
It was absolutely exhilarating. It was the greatest time to be alive, ever, for sure.
It's changing out there. You'll like it. People who are different, their time is coming. Hey mama, look around. Everybody's moving to a brand new sound. Hey mama, follow me. I know something's in you that you wanna set free. So let's go with the past now. Say hello to the love in your heart. Yes, I know that the world's spinning fast now. You gotta get yourself a brand new start. Hey mama, welcome to 16. Oh.
Millions of young Americans had grown up in an era of unparalleled affluence. But here they were denouncing materialism, competition, and conformity, the very values that had paved the way for that affluence. It was also an era of sexual freedom, ushered in by the birth control pill, long before the emergence of AIDS. Marriage and monogamy seemed passé. Music and drugs would change the world.
Lucy in the sky with diamonds. Lucy in the sky with diamonds. Summer is for walking, and that's just what they'll do. One of these days, these boots are gonna walk all over you. Tell the people what she wore. It was an itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini that she wore for the first time today. And it's
There were two very different movements going on at this time. One was a political movement that was dedicated almost entirely to ending the war in Vietnam. The other movement was, if you will, a consciousness movement. The musicians, in effect, bridged the two movements.
rock and roll all night and party every day. I wanna rock and roll all night and party every day.
I think for people my age back then, radio was the great secret common ground. It was the way we communicated with one another, and it was where all of our prophets and leaders were. It was where Bob Dylan and the Beatles and the Supremes and Aretha Franklin and Warren Nero were, and they were all singing quite revolutionary messages, and they were the ones who bound us together.
For America's counterculture, the 60s were about to peak on a farm in upstate New York.
There's people as far as the eye can see in every direction, under every tree, under every leaf, on every road. And I remember being in this helicopter and the door was open and this big cop looked down and said, "A lot of hippies down there." I'm going, "Well, yeah." And the cop next to him goes, "Yeah." And the first guy said, "I bet they're doing lots of illegal stuff." And the next one said, "Yeah." And the first one said, "I'm not going in there, nothing, no." And I suddenly realized, man, this was going to be a party. This was going to be fun.
Woodstock is distinguishable not only because it was the largest pop festival of its time, but it was also, in effect, the last.
Young people in particular began to rebel, calling for a society that rejected war and violence.
Students were at like a revolutionary breaking point. I remember some poll that said 1 million college students self-described themselves as revolutionaries.
It wasn't just the United States, it was international. Students in Germany, France, Japan, Ireland, China, Mexico had all taken to the streets, demanding everything: student power, an end to the war in Vietnam, or simply more freedom. President Grayson Kirk was not amused. Our young people, in disturbing numbers, appear to reject all form of authority, he said. I know of no time in our history when the gap between the generations has been wider or more potentially dangerous.
Serving USA.
While the white counterculture celebrated the Summer of Love, African Americans were undergoing a transformation of their own.
Over a period of less than a year, you had people who were calm, respectable, responsible Negroes, all of a sudden militants wearing dashikis with huge afros, taking Swahili class, identifying with the homeland. There's nothing more exhilarating or seductive than a change in consciousness. And in the 1960s, blacks made a transition, especially on the college campus, from being Negroes to being black to being Afro-Americans.
But no one missed the Black Power protests at the Olympics by American sprinters Tommy Smith and John Carlos.
Smith and Carlos' demonstration was not anti-American. It was pro-human rights, and most specifically, pro-black rights. People either wept and cheered, or they were outraged to the rafters.
Smith and Carlos were expelled from the Olympics, but their Black Power salute became one of the most provocative and enduring images of 1968.
It was the age of selfishness. It was the age of self-indulgence. It was the age of anti-authority. It was an age in which people did all kinds of wrong things. That was the start, really, of the drug problem in the United States.
To people who were of a conservative bent, everything seemed threatening. And it all seemed indistinguishably threatening, indissolubly threatening. You know, the Beatles saying they're as popular as Jesus. You might as well be trashing the American flag. You might as well be dodging the draft. To them, it all looked like the same thing.
But the impact of the 60s was not limited to American foreign policy. The environmental, gay rights, and women's movements, all born in the 60s, would, in the decades that followed, grow huge and have a profound impact on American society.
You went from civil rights to anti-war to women to gay. I mean, you could trace that.
The 60s are one of these amazing moments in history. There are not very many of them. When down a number of channels come people of very different sorts who simultaneously get it into their heads that the world doesn't have to be what it was or what it's assumed to be.
On balance, the 60s are a success because of what they did for black people and for women and for gay people and even for handicapped people. I mean, it empowers everybody.
We have reason to look back and feel good about the work that we have engaged in, the blood we've shed, even the lives that we've lost. All has been ultimately for the good.
my generation worked to make things better for all people. And that's about the best you can do in life.
It's important for the youth of a generation to feel that they can change